Alexander Cole was born into a world where wealth was not earned but inherited, where privileges were handed him like gifts wrapped in silk and gold. As the only son of the late Richard Cole, the legendary magnate whose empire stretched across finance, real estate, and technology, Alexander had grown up knowing nothing but affluence. Now in his early 30s, he carried himself like a king among commoners, towering in boardrooms with a commanding presence, and ruling the mansion he lived in with an iron hand. The Cole mansion itself was a fortress of wealth. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers glittering like a sky full of stars, and walls adorned with portraits of his ancestors, each one bearing the cold gaze of men who had built the dynasty brick by brick. Yet despite all the beauty, the house was suffocating, steeped in silence except for the footsteps of the staff who moved quickly, trying not to anger their master. Alexander treated the servants not as people but as invisible machines, expected to function without error. A forgotten napkin at the dinner table or a wine glass filled slightly below the rim could earn them his sharp tongue. He rarely raised his voice, but his words carried daggers, slicing through pride and dignity. And no one bore the brunt of his arrogance more than Rosa, the young black maid who worked tirelessly in his household. Rosa was a quiet presence who seemed to blend into the background, yet Alexander always noticed her, though never kindly. He would scold her for minor mistakes, belittle her when guests were around, and dismiss her suggestions with a wave of his hand. To him, she was nothing more than a servant, a shadow in his lavish world. What he didn't know was that Rosa had endured much more than his insults. Behind her calm expression was a lifetime of hardship, a story etched in long hours of labor and sacrifices she never spoke of. She carried her burden silently, her dignity intact even as Alexander's arrogance tried to crush it. At the dining table, Alexander would lounge in his seat like royalty, sipping wine older than most of his staff. Rosa, he once barked during an evening meal, how hard is it to serve dinner without looking like you belong in the slums? The staff froze, but Rosa simply lowered her eyes and continued her work. His words burned, yet she never let him see her break. To outsiders, Alexander was a perfect heir, handsome, sharp, and impossibly rich. Women admired his charm, businessmen envied his power, and society bowed at his name. But beneath that polished exterior lay entitlement, so deeply rooted that he couldn't see the humanity in those around him. Still, within the grandeur of his world, whispers of the past lingered like ghosts. The Cole mansion held secrets, buried in corners untouched for decades. In Alexander's arrogance, he dismissed such things, blind to the fact that the woman he scorned daily, Rosa, carried with her a truth that would shake his world to its very core. And while he believed himself untouchable, fate had already begun to weave a story that would humble the heir and unravel the pride he wore like armor. Rosa Alvarez moved through the Cole mansion like a ghost, present in every corner, yet invisible to those who live above the polished marble floors. She was the first to rise before dawn, sweeping to the grand hallways in silence, and the last to retreat long after the chandeliers dimmed. For years, the mansion had been both her livelihood and her prison, a world of luxury she could touch but never claim as her own. Her life was one of quiet dignity. Rosa had learned long ago that silence was her shield, patience her weapon. She endured Alexander Cole's sharp words and condescending glares without flinching. He was the heir, the master, the untouchable, and she, the maid who carried trays heavier than her body should have to, who polished the silver until it gleamed, and who stitched torn suits without ever being thanked. Yet behind her calm exterior, Rosa was not as invisible as she seemed. She carried within her a private flame, a secret part of herself that the mansion could not take away. In her pocket, hidden beneath the fabric of her uniform, she kept a small locket. It was old, its silver edges worn down by time, but inside was a picture of her mother. Smiling, vibrant, a woman Rosa barely remembered but held close through that single photograph. Whenever the weight of Alexander's cruelty bore down on her, Rosa would sneak away to the servants' quarters and open the locket. The sight of her mother's face reminded her who she was beyond the maid's uniform, beyond the insults. Her mother had always told her she was strong, destined for more than the world might allow her. That strength carried Rosa through the endless days when Alexander seemed determined to grind her spirit into dust. Though Rosa's place in the mansion seemed small, Her watchful eyes saw much. She noticed the way Alexander lingered by his mother's portrait in the great hall, his expression betraying a rare softness he would never show the world. She noticed the way the older servants whispered when his name was mentioned, glancing nervously toward closed doors. The Cole mansion was full of secrets, and Rosa, though outwardly obedient, felt those secrets tugging at her soul. There were nights when Rosa lay awake on her narrow cot, wondering why she felt such a strange pull toward the family she served. She was not related to them, she reminded herself. She was a maid, born into hardship, raised on scraps, and given this job as a lifeline. And yet, something inside her whispered otherwise, a gnawing feeling that her story was tied to theirs in ways she couldn't yet explain. Still, Rosa never let her questions show. She kept her head bowed, her voice soft, her presence small. To Alexander, she was nothing but another servant in a long line of staff who came and went. But Rosa was different. Her roots in this mansion ran deeper than he could imagine, entwined with the very bloodline he thought was his alone to claim. And though she remained in the shadows, Rosa was destined to step into the light. The secrets she carried would not stay hidden forever. The Cole mansion had always been a place of grandeur and gossip. Its walls, hung with centuries-old portraits, seemed to absorb secrets and release them in hushed whispers. On a gray afternoon, one such secret began to unravel. An old family friend, Mr. Harold Whitman, arrived at the mansion. He was a man with silver hair and a sharp gaze, carrying with him the air of someone who knew more than he should. Alexander greeted him with the usual detached politeness, reserved for people who had known his late mother. To Alexander, conversations about her always seemed distant, like opening a wound he never allowed to heal. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Whitman said as they sat in the library. "Strong, compassionate, but burdened with choices no one should have had to make." Alexander shifted uncomfortably, swirling his drink in silence. He didn't like vague statements, especially when they hinted at something he didn't control. He preferred to remember his mother as flawless, untouchable, and far above the petty mistakes of ordinary people. Rosa, meanwhile, lingered nearby. She was dusting the hall just outside the library door, moving slowly. Her ears pricked. Every word seemed to echo down the hallway, as if carried by fate itself. "She carried a heavy secret, Alex," Whitman continued softly. "There were sacrifices made for family name, sacrifices that haunt even now." Alexander frowned. "What are you talking about? My mother had everything. She lived a life of privilege. There was nothing for her to sacrifice." Whitman's eyes, shadowed by memory, flickered with sadness. "Not all sacrifices are visible. Sometimes what is hidden defines us more than what is shown." Rosa's heart skipped. She froze, her dusting cloth trembling in her hand. Hidden? Sacrifices? The words clawed at her. Something about them stirred a memory of her own mother whispering stories late at night. Stories about working in a mansion long ago, a mansion filled with secrets and betrayal. Later that evening, Rosa sat in her small room in the servants' quarters, replaying the conversation in her mind. Her locket felt heavier than usual as she clutched it tightly, staring at her mother's faded smile. Could it be possible? Could her mother's past somehow tie her to the Coles? The next day, the whispers continued. Rosa overheard another hushed exchange between two older maids in the kitchen. She never wanted to leave, one said, but she had no choice. The scandal would have ruined them. Scandal? Rosa whispered under her breath. Her pulse raced. She wanted to demand answers, but she knew better. Questions from a maid could be dangerous. She would have to listen, to observe, to piece together the fragments of a puzzle no one wanted her to solve. For Alexander, the conversation with Whitman gnawed at him too. Though he dismissed it publicly, in the privacy of his thoughts, he felt a growing unease. He was arrogant, yes, but not oblivious. Something about the weight in Whitman's tone hinted at a truth buried deep beneath his polished family legacy. And so, the mansion itself seemed to tighten around both Alexander and Rosa, whispering its secrets more insistently with each passing day. The Cole mansion was ablaze with golden light, laughter, and the soft notes of a string quartet. It was one of Alexander Cole's lavish soirees, where the city's elite gathered to bask in wealth, power, and prestige. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Champagne glasses clinked, and polished marble floors reflected the splendor of the evening. Alexander stood in the center of it all, perfectly groomed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding attention. He thrived in these moments, where people admired him, envied him, and whispered his name with reverence. But his arrogance often sought a target, and tonight it found Rosa. Rosa moved silently through the ballroom, carrying trays of champagne, her maid's uniform stark against the brilliance of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Her quiet dignity drew some sympathetic glances, but most of the guests barely noticed her existence. To Alexander, she was simply part of the furniture, useful but beneath acknowledgement. As Rosa passed by, Alexander's sharp eyes caught a minor misstep. The slightest tremor in her hand that made a glass wobble. With a smirk, he seized the opportunity. "Careful, Rosa," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the laughter. "Do try not to ruin my guest's evening with your clumsiness. I'd hate for anyone to think the Cole household hires incompetence." The room fell momentarily silent. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some stifling smiles at Alexander's cruelty, others uncomfortable with the public humiliation. Rosa froze, her face flushing with a mix of shame and anger. Her usual patience cracked. She turned, her dark eyes meeting Alexander's with fire he had never seen before. "I may carry trays, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "But at least I carry my dignity with me. Can you say the same?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Alexander's smirk faltered. He was not used to being challenged, least of all by someone he considered beneath him. His jaw tightened, his pride wounded. "You forget your place," he hissed, stepping closer. "You're nothing more than a maid in my house. Don't mistake that for equality." Rosa's hands trembled, but not with fear. For too long she had endured his arrogance in silence. But tonight, the weight of secrets and whispers pushed her to speak. "And you," she whispered, her voice carrying farther than she intended, "forget that not everything in this house belongs to you. Some things, some truths, were never yours to control." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Rosa's lips pressed together, but her silence spoke louder than words. Her defiance, her insinuation, unsettled him. For the first time, Alexander felt the ground beneath his arrogance shift. The crowd sensed it too, the invisible crack between master and maid widening into something unexplainable. As Rosa walked away, her back straight and her dignity intact, Alexander stood rooted in place, his pride burning. But beneath the anger, a seed of unease took root. She knew something about him, something about his mother, and that knowledge threatened to unravel the very foundation of his world. Chapter 5. The Hidden Truth Unearthed. The storm outside raged with relentless fury, its thunder rattling the walls of the Cole mansion, as if nature itself sought to expose the secrets it harbored. The household had long since gone quiet after the party, the guests dispersing into the night. Yet Rosa could not sleep. The sting of Alexander's humiliation still lingered, but even stronger was the echo of her own words, the daring hint she had thrown at him in front of everyone. She knew she had crossed a line, but deep down, something had pushed her, a sense that the truth, her truth, was clawing its way to the surface. Drawn by an unshakable instinct, Rosa wandered to the mansion's labyrinth of hallways. Her steps led her toward the attic, a place seldom visited, cloaked in dust and shadows. She pushed open the creaking door and climbed the narrow staircase, her candle flickering against the cobweb beams. The attic was suffused with the smell of age, wood, dust, and forgotten time. Boxes lined the walls, many marked with fading labels of years long past. Rosa's hands trembled as she pulled one box forward, then another, until at last her fingers brushed against something different. An old chest, locked but fragile from neglect. With effort, she pried it open. Inside lay a collection of letters tied with ribbon, brittle photographs, and official-looking papers folded neatly. Her heart thudded in her chest as she sifted through them. One letter caught her eye. It was written in delicate, feminine handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, addressed Alexander's late mother. Rosa's eyes scanned the words, each line unraveling a story of love, shame, and secrecy. The letter spoke of an affair, of a child born in silence and hidden from the world. Her breath caught when she found a photograph tucked between the papers. It was of a young Eleanor Cole, cradling a baby with dark skin, swaddled in a warm blanket. Rosa's hand shook violently now, the candlelight dancing over her face. Digging deeper, she uncovered hospital documents, birth records from over 2 decades ago. There was, written in ink that had not faded, Rosa Johnson, daughter of Eleanor Cole. Her eyes filled with tears as the truth struck her like a thunderclap. She was not just a maid in this house. She was blood. She was family. She was Alexander's half-sister, born of the same mother, but hidden away because of the color of her skin and the scandal it would have ignited in society. The room spun around her as emotions warred within her, rage at the injustice, grief for the years stolen from her, and awe at the revelation she had always sensed but never dared to believe. Clutching the locket at her neck, the one her mother had given her long ago, Rosa whispered into the darkness, "So this is why you kept me close, yet always at a distance." Below, in his grand chamber, Alexander slept soundly, unaware that his world was about to shatter. Rosa closed the chest carefully, her tears drying into resolve. The truth could no longer stay buried, and when dawn came, she would decide how to wield it. The morning sun spilled across the Cole estate, its golden rays unable to penetrate the storm brewing inside. Rosa had not slept a moment. The box in the attic, with its damning evidence, had burned into her thoughts like fire. Every letter, every photograph, every document had been an arrow striking her soul. The truth was undeniable now. She was not just a maid. She was a Cole. She clutched the documents tightly in her hands as she descended the staircase. Her footsteps echoed to the grand halls, firm and unyielding, no longer the timid shuffle of a servant. Today, she would speak her truth. Alexander sat at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee with casual arrogance. He barely looked up when Rosa entered, his usual sharp remark on the edge of his lips. But something in her gaze stopped him. She was different. Her eyes no longer carried the quiet submission he was used to. They were ablaze with purpose. "Alexander," she began, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "We need to talk." He set his cup down, raising an eyebrow. "Since when do you decide when we talk?" he asked mockingly. "Go on then, amuse me." Rosa placed a stack of letters and papers on the table in front of him. The old photograph slid out, the image of Eleanor Cole cradling a dark-skinned baby lying bare against the polished wood. Alexander's smirk faltered. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "The truth," Rosa said, her words carrying years of buried pain. "The truth about me, about us." He scoffed, though his eyes lingered on the photograph. "You think showing me old scraps of paper will mean anything? You're a maid, Rosa. Nothing more." Her voice hardened. "No, Alexander. I am your sister." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Alexander laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "My sister? That's absurd. My mother would never." "She did," Rosa cut in, her voice trembling now with the force of her emotions. "She had me before you. She loved me, but she was forced to hide me because of what people would say, because of who I am, because of the color of my skin." Alexander stared at her, anger flashing in his eyes. "Lies!" he barked, but his voice cracked at the edges. His gaze darted between the photograph, the birth record, and the locket Rosa now held in her trembling hands. "This was hers," Rosa whispered, holding out the locket. "She gave it to me before she passed. Inside is her picture, the same one you keep framed in your room." His breath hitched as he opened it, and there she was, his mother, smiling with the same warmth he remembered. The evidence was irrefutable. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier. Alexander's arrogance, his shield of superiority, crumbled piece by piece. His face paled, his hands trembling as he realized what the truth meant. Every cruel word, every insult, Every humiliation he had hurled at Rosa, all of it had been against his own blood. "No!" he muttered, sinking back in his chair. His eyes darted toward Rosa, filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "You can't be." "But I am," Rosa said softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Your half-sister, the one you never knew, the one you mistreated all your life." Alexander's breath came ragged now. The empire of pride he had built around himself collapsed, leaving only shame and the echo of a mother's secret that had finally clawed his way into the light. Alexander Cole sat in his study long after Rosa had left him with the truth. The documents lay scattered across his mahogany desk like shards of shattered mirror, reflecting a past he had never imagined. The photograph of his mother holding the infant Rosa seemed to mock him, whispering of a love and a life concealed from him. His hands trembled as he held the locket, the image of Eleanor Cole smiling with tenderness burning into his soul. He could not breathe. Every memory of his cruelty toward Rosa replayed in his mind like a reel of shame. Her quiet endurance, her bowed head, the way she had borne his arrogance, it all came back with piercing clarity. She had endured his insults, his mockery, his humiliations, and all the while she had been his sister, his blood, his family. Alexander pressed his palms into his eyes, but no amount of pressure could block the flood of guilt. He saw his mother again, gentle and kind, shielding him from the harshness of the world. He remembered the lullabies, the bedtime stories, the way she always said family was the truest treasure. And now he realized her words had carried a hidden weight. She had buried the truth, fearing scandal and the judgment of society, but in doing so had left her children fractured and unaware of one another. Meanwhile, Rosa stood in the servants' quarters, staring at the same set of documents. Her chest ached with emotions she could not name. Anger surged through her veins, anger for the years she had suffered under Alexander's tyranny, anger for being cast aside like a shameful secret. Yet alongside the rage came something more complicated: grief. Grief for the mother who had lived in silence. Grief for the years stolen from her as a rightful member of the family. Grief for the brother she could not love because of his cruelty. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the locket. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not only from pain but from the heaviness of truth. She wanted to hate Alexander completely. But a part of her heart betrayed her, whispering that he was not just her tormentor. He was her brother, tied to her by blood, by the woman they had both lost too soon. Back in his study, Alexander paced like a man possessed. The arrogance that had defined him felt like a distant memory, stripped away by the unbearable weight of guilt. He saw the faces of his party guests, the times he belittled Rosa in front of others, the memory of her humiliation carved into his conscience, leaving a scar he feared would never heal. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt small. He was a billionaire and heir to an empire, but none of it could shield him from the truth or buy him redemption. His shame was deeper than wealth could bury. Late into the night, he whispered into the silence, "What have I done, Mother? What have I become?" And though no answer came, he knew that the road ahead would not be paved with riches or power. It would be paved with humility, repentance, and the fragile hope of forgiveness from Rosa and from himself. The following morning, Alexander Cole stood at the balcony of the Grand Cole estate, gazing down at the gardens where Rosa often worked. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow across the lawn, yet the warmth did nothing to ease the coldness in his heart. For the first time in his life, the estate, the symbol of his wealth and power, felt hollow. What good were riches if they had cost him compassion, respect, and the dignity of his own blood? He knew what he had to do, though the thought filled him with dread. Apologies came easily to ordinary men, but Alexander had never been ordinary. He had built his identity on superiority, dominance, and arrogance. To lower himself, to bare his soul, meant tearing down the very foundation of who he thought he was. But shame had already stripped him. What remained now was only the choice between cowardice and redemption. Rosa was in the dining hall that afternoon, setting the table with her usual precision. Her movements were calm, but her heart was in turmoil. She had kept her distance since the revelation, unsure how to face Alexander again. Would he deny the truth? Would he throw her out to protect his reputation? Or would he simply ignore her existence? leaving her forever trapped between family and servitude? When Alexander entered the room, Rosa stiffened, her hand tightening around a silver fork. But his demeanor was different. His shoulders, once square with pride, were lowered. His face, once hardened with arrogance, was softened with vulnerability. "Rosa," he began, his voice low but steady, "I owe you more than words could ever repair, but I must try." She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she saw no contempt in them, only pain. "I treated you as less than human," Alexander continued. "I humiliated you, mocked you, made you feel invisible. All the while, you were my sister, the only piece of mother I had left, and I destroyed every chance to know you. I was blind, Rosa, blind and cruel." His words trembled with sincerity, and the room fell silent but for the beating of their hearts. Rosa's throat tightened. She wanted to resist, to hold on to her anger, but something in his voice broke through her defenses. "I cannot undo the past," he said, stepping closer, "but I can choose the future. I want you by my side, not as a servant, but as my family. You are my sister, and I will never again let you live in the shadows." Tears welled in Rosa's eyes. Her silence stretched, heavy with years of suffering and the weight of forgiveness. At last, she whispered, "Do you mean it, Alexander? Or is this another performance for your pride?" He dropped to one knee, the heir of billions kneeling before the maid he had once scorned. "I swear it," he said. "I will make this right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Rosa's tears spilled over. Slowly, she reached out, lifting him to his feet. "Then let us begin," she murmured. And in that moment, the Cole mansion felt different. Wealth and arrogance no longer defined its walls. Instead, it echoed with something long denied: family.